What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, I think we're less than 100 days from college football season, which is...
From week 0, we are.
Oh, okay. All right. So...
Tongue-in-cheek.
That was false, what I read online.
Yeah.
No, week 0 is college football.
We love week 0 because it's college football extended.
Right. It is real college football. That counts. This week we are going to talk about CBS last week. Shout out to David Cobb for being on our podcast last week. He was a part of doing CBS's college football coach rankings, which they released last week. All Power 5 coaches, 1 through 69. And we did our own top 10 list. We didn't go 69 deep, but we did do our top 10. And so I want to talk about their list. Like, do we see any coaches that were overrated, underrated? I want to go through our list and just talk about some of the best coaches in college football. And before we begin, I just want to say there's a lot of great coaches in college football. So we especially with our top 10, we really are splitting hairs between a lot of great coaches. So that being said, Daniel, let's start with our list. And David Cobb came on this show and promised us something. He said,
Plain daylight.
He said, this is the year that Kirby Smart overtakes Nick Saban for number 1. And on the CBS list, it was Saban 1, Kirby 2. Look, he convinced me. You and I both had Kirby Smart 1, Nick Saban 2. Talk me through why Kirby Smart 1, Saban's the GOAT, right?
Yeah, if this is a GOAT list, obviously Saban is first. And then I think there's a gap between him and Bear Bryant and whoever else, Bobby Dodd, whoever else is on that list. But we're not doing a GOAT list. And, a way you described it when we were talking through this is if you're hiring someone, if your favorite team is hiring a coach this season, who do you want to hire? And, Saban's an excellent hire, but Kirby Smart right now would probably edge him out just with his recent, success and, what he's already built, and he's younger. All of those things kind of play into it. This isn't a projection anymore. This is, I think he has taken the spot from Nick Saban, and he is number 1 as far as coaches go. I think that nobody's doing it like Kirby Smart right now. And, it's like he's got the history to back it up. It's not just some recent success, but now he's got the trophy case to really drive it home with, whether it be recruits or whoever. He's got the draft picks to show his development through the program, and hiring coaches, you can tell position coaches, all those kinds of things. And obviously recruiting has been the lifeblood of the program. So just a phenomenal start to a career. Some people forget that specifically the Kirby Saban thing is this was not Saban's first stop. He's at Alabama after already being a head coach for a while in college football and in the NFL. This is Kirby Smart's first time being a head coach. And so for him to learn on the fly at a place like Georgia, which is his alma mater, and then to be where he is today, this is just nothing short of remarkable. And that's why he gets the number 1.
You started to talk about this, and I want to mention it before we go any further. What did you value in putting together your list? So I know you mentioned like current, trajectory. You mentioned a little bit of history. What did you value?
So I have several things that I have in my pot that I looked at. One of them is just straight up team success over the past, over their career, recent history, past few years, that kind of thing. I looked at, have they made it to the postseason? Have they made it to the college football playoff? As we get further down this list, that'll kind of come into play because some haven't, some have. What the development is like at their program, guys they're putting in the NFL, guys they're, getting awards, things of that nature. But, by and large, it came down to, putting all those things in a pot together alongside, is this guy a recruiter? Is this guy this? Is this guy that? and put it all together into what you're talking about, where you're going to decide who's the best one to hire for this season. Because I do think you handicap yourself if you only go off of championships in this argument. As you'll see, as we talk about later in the list, someone who's won championships may be behind someone who hasn't won any championships. And that's something I think, do you have championship potential? What are your philosophies on winning? I think that's important because, if you're focused too much on, let's say, the transfer portal rather than high school recruiting, I think that's going to hinder you. If you're not focused at all on the transfer portal, that may hinder you as well. You've got to be a good balance. Also, they seem like a people person. Like, they're probably going to be a good recruiter if they're a good people person. I think that's what sets these first two apart. They're both tremendous, people pleasers. They're able to be there, recruit. They're able to appeal to the young player. They're able to appeal to the parents. So I really took a lot into consideration. But yes, I did. On my list was just general success as far as, winning games, team success as far as making it to postseason, winning championships. And then just overall like culture, but it's tough to put a pin on that. So just kind of the vibe you get from that coach, like what kind of person are they?
I like that. So I was like, so what's on my list? I need to jot all this down because it was all in my head of what I thought about. So I definitely did look at full body of work, but I weighted more your results recently than your results a decade ago. For example,
Like
Mac
historically,
Brown.
yeah.
Like Mac Brown's a championship winning coach, but again, this is a coach ranking heading into the 2023 season. What I want Mac Brown as my head coach tomorrow, he's not who he was in 2005, right? So
he's a top 30 coach, top 40 coach. He's not a top 10 coach.
Right. Recruiting matters in college football. I care less if you are doing less with more, because your job as a college football coach, almost more than anything else, is to assemble your roster. You are the general manager. It's part of your job. I hate hearing other people in college football talk about, well, they should be winning. They have all these 5-star players. How do you think they got those 5-star players? They recruited. Like, that is your job as a head coach, is to assemble your roster. And so I put a lot more stock in coaches that assembled a good roster, because that's your job. And not
what's
less
like being a CEO. They talk about being a CEO of an organization. Are you going to be a great CEO if you don't hire the best people? Hire the best people.
Hire the best people. Yep. So I put a lot of stock on recruiting. That doesn't mean I didn't give credit to people who've done less with more, but I still think we'll talk about someone later, has recruited well for where they're at and has still done less with more talent.
Done more
it was
with
both, less. And it was impressive. So, I mean, for example, famously, David Cobb, a couple of years ago had Dan Mullen rated ahead of Kirby Smart, with kind of that logic of like, look what he's done with less talent. Well, my, how things can change so quickly. Expectation versus reality. So what is the expectation of the school you're at? Someone that's not on this list, that's in the top 15 of the CBS list, Dave Clawson. All right. He's at Wake Forest. What are the realistic expectations of Wake Forest? Honestly, if they're going bowling every few years, that's success. He has an above 500 record at Wake Forest. That's really impressive for Wake Forest. So he is exceeding expectations for that school versus a Georgia and Alabama. You should be competing for national championships. So someone like Mark Richt, this is why Georgia moved on from him. As great of a coach as, you and I grew up Georgia fans. We love Mark Richt. Great person, great coach. He wasn't good enough for what Georgia knew they were capable of. And obviously they've proven themselves right at this point. So expectation versus reality. Development, you mentioned NFL draft. Like, are you developing players? And state of the program, which you kind of mentioned, we're going to talk about that next week here on the podcast. But like, what's the state of your program right now? Currently, again, like a Mac Brown, like North Carolina, they got Drake May, but this isn't Texas in 2005. So all that being said, I also had Kirby Smart at 1. I don't think I'm not going to say it's not close, but I think you've got to put Kirby, if you're with the lens of Who are the best coaches in college football heading into 2023? Who would you want to hire at your school? Because Kirby checks every box. He's 81-15. That means, Daniel, there's a famous Nick Saban stat. He's almost done it. That Nick Saban has more first-round draft picks at Alabama than he has losses. Kirby Smart now has equal first-round draft picks and losses at Georgia in his first 7 years. He's won back-to-back national championships. Georgia has set the record in the last 3 years for most players taken in a 3-year period and a 2-year period in the NFL draft. So it checks every box. They're on top of the college football world. Georgia is right now, and Kirby has been the CEO of that program. He has completely. We talked about it in 2015 with under Mark Richt. Georgia was good. Kirby Smart has made this the best program, not just team, best program in college football right now. So to me, he is a clear one. And that leads us to Saban at 2. It's still Saban, right? I mean, I jokingly said to set you up, but he's the GOAT. He's the GOAT. And I still think heading into 2023, if I'm hiring someone next other than Kirby, I'm hiring Saban.
Yeah, I mean, if he gives you 3 years, I mean, whatever. Yeah, it's tough because I can't even put a number on how long I think he'll coach because I think he just truly loves what he's doing. It's going to take probably a bad situation for him to leave. But yeah, I mean, you hire him. I think at a minimum, you're getting 3 years out of him, and 3 years of Saban is better exponentially than anybody left after that.
Yeah, his record speaks for itself. And I'll say too, again, I put a lot of emphasis on recruiting. He's recruited 3 of the best classes ever in the last 3 recruiting cycles at Alabama. And this last one he did without 2 coordinators being hired. So obviously high school recruits look at Nick Saban and say, I don't care if we have an offensive or a defensive coordinator. I'm just believing in that guy and that he can develop me and get me to the NFL and win championships and win games. And it's Nick Saban. It's Alabama. This is where I feel like the gap is I think 1 and 2 is tier 1. And I think now there's a gap. We can go into tier 2. Talk about the next tier of coaches. I don't mean to not talk about Nick Saban. He's the GOAT. He's the greatest college football coach of all time.
I don't think there's a lot of explanation that's needed.
Yeah.
Truly. So,
it's Nick Saban.
No one's arguing.
Let's go to 3. So 3, I'm looking at the CBS list. Okay, our 3 was the CBS 6. Brian Kelly. So you had Kelly at 4, right?
Right.
Okay, and I actually had Kelly at 3. So Brian Kelly. Since I had him higher, I'll start with my Brian Kelly defense of him being 3rd right here. 1, again, full body of work. This is a guy who has won at every stop he's been at, from Grand Valley State to Central Michigan to Cincinnati to Notre Dame. And now he's coming off of, in year 1 of being in the SEC West, he wins the division. Like
in 10 games.
That exceeded they were so close to being 10-2 LSU. They were 10-3 LSU. Man, they were close. 10-4, that's right. Because because they were 9-3.
SEC championship, yeah.
Yeah. So close. He has won at every stop he's been at. He comes into LSU in year 1, far exceeds expectations in year 1. I don't even think if you asked him if he expected that, he would have said they were going to win the SEC West. No way. He's recruiting his butt off at LSU, which everyone wondered, like, hey, is it just Notre Dame or is it Brian Kelly? Because obviously at Notre Dame, he would get some top 10 classes, but I think everyone knew, like, hey, the academic restrictions, it's Notre Dame. Can he actually recruit if he's given the opportunity? Well, he's far and above proven in these first 2 cycles that absolutely Brian Kelly can recruit given the resources that a school like LSU has, and which is why he left Notre Dame for LSU. LSU has the ability, a lot more so than Notre Dame, to win a national championship. Like, they have all the resources they need, whether that be financial or, again, it's getting kids into school and having more spots in the roster for kids who might have trouble getting into Notre Dame. So he's won at every spot. He's played for a national championship. He went to 2 playoffs at Notre Dame. He won the SEC West in year 1 at LSU. Trajectory of this program, we're going to talk about it. I'm a big believer in LSU this year as far as where they're at. They've got two phenomenal quarterbacks, a great receiver room. This current team is great. The expectation is for him. He's at LSU. They want to be beating Bama, one of the SEC West. In year one, he did that. So Brian Kelly to me, again, if my last lens of if I'm hiring a coach tomorrow for my program, after Saban and Kirby, I want Brian Kelly.
Yeah, Brian, I have him 4, so we're very close. And this collection, we're very close on. I think our top 11 or 12 were the same people. They're just
splitting hairs,
jockeying a spot or two. So I'm glad we're kind of on the same wavelength there. But yeah, obviously I waited. I put a lot of weight in the decision for me to be high on LSU last year on Brian Kelly because I do really believe in what he's doing. Specifically, Jacob, you and I grew up in the South where one of the rules of being a college football fan is that you're supposed to hate Notre Dame. For some reason,
USC,
we're all taught that Notre Dame, USC, to maybe throw in Ohio State. I don't know. Just the other teams that tend to give Southern teams trouble. So I grew up not liking Notre Dame, and it was pretty easy to make fun of them because they were just not good for a very long time. Tyrone Willingham was their coach, Charlie Weiss. I mean, they just were not a good team for so many years. And I remember thinking, wow, like they really are just a team that was good in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we really don't have to worry about Notre Dame ever being good again. And then Brian Kelly was hired and immediately turned them around. I mean, for me, that was enough evidence because I'm watching a school that can't get it together under several different coaches, and then they make one change and hire one guy, and it is immediately fixed. Now, that said everything it needed to me. I think he got Notre Dame back on the map and made it, what it once was, or at least it's at least in the same air of what it once was. And then obviously at LSU, I mean, he checked a lot of boxes in year one. And I think that the recruiting and everything gives you confidence going forward. So I had no questions really about him leading into the guy that I had at number 3. He was your number 4 and he's our number 4. Actually, I think he was your number 5, wasn't he?
We're going to have to talk about it.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and jump, if that's cool,
to
Jim Harbaugh. I had him at number 3. He ended up being our number 4, which I agree with. I like it. I like that spot. I think that when you talk about from a program perspective, building a program, same thing I just said with Notre Dame, he did with Michigan. Michigan, up until about 2007 with Lloyd Carr, was a very solid top 10 program. Had some very good players, guys who went to the league and played on Sundays, did all that stuff. It was great. After that, after Lloyd Carr left, we have Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke and all these guys that just were awful. And it was weird seeing Michigan be that bad. And it was kind of right as Ohio State's always been good, but they kind of got, under Urban, and they've just been a machine for a while now. And, it's tough to talk about one without talking about the other because they're so intertwined, however you say that. But one thing I respect about Harbaugh, he came in, immediately raised the floor of Michigan. They were no longer a joke. And everybody basically just started asking one question: when are they going to beat Ohio State? Because he answered their other questions. Hey, we're not going to be a laughing stock. We're going to beat teams we're supposed to beat, basically lose the teams we're supposed to lose to until we get, everything in place. And it was a slow build for some, for getting what they wanted. But the past 2 years, beating Ohio State and winning the Big Ten, I just can't undersell it enough. Overstate it enough, whatever you say. He is one of the best coaches in the nation, and he did it at Stanford, and then I think, not that we're ranking NFL coaches, but he did a great job in the NFL. And then for him to come back, it's like you can very much, it's like with Brian Kelly, you can follow where he's been, and he's been successful everywhere. There's a common denominator, and it is Jim Harbaugh. An area I give pause is we talk about if you're hiring tomorrow for the future and he keeps flirting with NFL jobs, that makes me nervous. But I think he's got a very high standard for what he does with his players and everything. And I think that it translates and it manifests itself in wins. So I've got Harbaugh as my number 3. We have him at collectively as 4, but why don't you explain why you had him just a tick lower?
Yeah, Harbaugh, here's the thing. I think it is right that the list we're going to put on social media has Jim Harbaugh. You mentioned it. Harbaugh has won everywhere he's been, even in the NFL. He had success in the NFL, and not many people have had success doing both. I mean, look at Nick Saban. Very few people have had success to Matt Rule doing both. So I think whole body of work, that's definitely a box checked for Jim Harbaugh. Obviously, recent success. He finally got over the hump after losing the first, 7 against Ohio State. He finally won the last 2, won the Big Ten on top of that. I think again, this is where, we were just talking about before we jumped on. You and I have followed college football like very closely since, for me, it was 2007 when I started really following it closely. So literally my loving college football has been in the Nick Saban era, which means everything gets compared to, dude, he's won 6 titles at Bama. So I'm going to caution myself as I preface my next thing, which is like, hey, when you get a golden opportunity, you've got to grab it by the throat. And you can't let TCU beat you in that Fiesta Bowl this year. Like, you would have given Georgia a much better game if you're Michigan. So that's downing it a little bit in my head of like, you beat Ohio State, you won the Big Ten in back-to-back years, and you couldn't win a playoff game. Like, you couldn't be competitive in a playoff game 2 years ago. You couldn't beat a TCU team that just lost their conference championship game, like going to the playoff. Like, golden opportunity here. I also think it's a miss that they haven't been, until the class right now that hasn't signed yet, they have not capitalized in recruiting with winning back-to-back Big Ten championships. If you're doing that, you need to be recruiting top 10. If you're Michigan, probably top 7. Dude, their last class was 19th. Like, you don't win back-to-back Big Ten championships and go get a class ranked 19th. That being said, Jim Harbaugh deserves to be in the top 5. He has been nothing if not consistent. Like you said, he has consistently won in Michigan. The only offseason was the COVID year. After that, he had an 8-4 year. That was his worst record at Michigan outside of that COVID year. And again, I think he raises the floor and ceiling of any program he steps into. And so I love Jim Harbaugh. I think he's a great football coach. I'm happy that he got over the hump. Felt bad for him for a little bit. He couldn't beat Ohio State. It's the one that matters. And he's done that twice in a row now. So let's go to our number 5, which is Ryan Day. I had Ryan Day at 4 above Harbaugh. So, Daniel, you and I and whoever's listening to this can be our little rehab session. You can tell me why I was wrong to do that. I'm going to try to defend it here for a second. All right. Have we ever been as hard on a coach as we have been Ryan Day? The guy is 45-6. That is his record as a head coach. 45-6. And 3 of those losses were in the college football playoff. So he's gone 44-3 in the regular season or conference championships. 44-3. Here's the problem. 2 of those losses, all 3 have come in the last 2 years. And 2 of those losses came to Michigan in the last 2 years. And that's what matters. And that's the lens people are looking through. But if I go down my list of stuff I said at the beginning, results, he's 45-6. Full body of work. Again, he took over a program that was in a good spot in 2019. I'm not going to downgrade that.
He was born on 3rd, right?
Born on 3rd, but trajectory. Ohio State's recruiting, you could say the same or better. You know what Ohio State stopped doing when he stepped in? They didn't lose to Iowa on the road. They didn't lose to Purdue on the road. They stopped that junk as soon as he became head coach. Urban always had one of these funky no-show losses. At every stop he's been at, they'd have a no-show loss. And Ohio State cut the no-show losses out. Like expectation versus reality, Ohio State's supposed to be competing for national championships. Well, since he's been there, they went to the playoff in 19, and they were a play away from beating Clemson. Clemson would go on to, well, LSU won that year, but again, if you go back and look at SP Plus, even after the season, they had a higher SP Plus rating than LSU at the end of the year, the team that most people regard to be the best team of all time. 2020, they played Bama in the championship. 2021, they missed the playoff. 2022, they're a field goal away from beating Georgia. And seeing how that TCU game went, do I think they go on to stomp TCU? I sure do. I mean, that game wasn't close. So I think people are too hard on Ryan Day. Like CBS had him at 8, and I think that's ridiculous. I think we're looking at Ryan Day the same way we looked at Kirby Smart coming off of the 2020 season, which was, hey, you played for the national championship in year 2. You've kind of done this still really, really good elite level, but not championship winning. Okay, you're losing a couple clunkers here. I like what Josh Pate says, just because someone hasn't done something doesn't mean they can't. And I mean, honestly, if Ryan Day goes and wins the national championship this year, he's on 3 at everybody's list this time next year. So we are one season away from him beating Michigan, winning a playoff game, winning a natty, from all this going away, all the criticism going away. And he's capable. And so if I'm looking at if I'm hiring a coach tomorrow, even between Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh, especially given that recruiting, I think is a huge part of the job as a college football coach. I would lean Ryan Day, even if the on-the-field result the last 2 years has gone the other way in that one game.
Yeah, I was going to make the comparison to Kirby as well. Prior to the 2 championships. So yeah, after that 20 season, people kind of stale on him, and I think that is similar. But if you go back, and all it took, obviously Kirby won back-to-back championships now. Even just the one championship causes you to look back at all the success with a different lens.
Right.
So if Ryan Day does that, all of a sudden you're looking back, and the record now means something to everybody in all the chat rooms and all the everything. You could say, no, look, he's got his championship and he's been successful since he started. So I think he made a compelling point. I actually had him, I think I had him at 6 looking back. And it's probably largely because of the recency bias and everything. But I also had, a guy who we have next on our list. I had him at 5. So,
which is fair. Again, this is splitting hairs here.
Right. So with Ryan Day, last thing I'll say is, him to have not, I think these past 2 years, not beating Michigan kind of stuck in my craw a little bit, because I think that they were the better team both of those years. And it was kind of surprising. And then, I think that they've been a very talented team, and to not finish, I think publicly, like what you're talking about, our list having Harbaugh above Day is correct because of especially the past couple of years. But yeah, I think he learned from the right guy, maybe on the field rather than off the field, with learning from Urban, and kind of having that killer instinct and getting, recruiting and all that kind of stuff, emphasizing the right things, took all the best from what Urban did. So we'll see if it plays out. I do think that he's going to crawl up this list, but I think when you're splitting hairs, I had to have some reasons. And my reason is I had Lincoln Riley slightly ahead of Ryan Day, which led to him being 4, which ultimately led to led to him being 5, which led to Lincoln Riley being 6 on our list. I had him at 5. Lincoln, if he didn't have this past season, I would have not had him this high. And what I mean by that is Lincoln Riley being successful at Oklahoma was very similar to what Ryan Day has done, where they basically have gotten the keys to a great organization and either perfected it or made it run smoothly. I didn't know if Lincoln Riley was really that great or if it was just Oklahoma propping him up. But then you take him from Oklahoma. I know we're in the transfer portal, so his quarterback goes with him and all this kind of stuff. But all that to be said, him coming in at USC in year one, doing what he did, I have a ton more respect for what Lincoln Riley is than what I did before. So this season actually holds a lot of weight for me for what he's done. Now, obviously, the development of quarterbacks and the Heisman trophies and all of that is really fun to talk about. And I do think that should hold some weight to what has happened. Development is a big deal. I think doing it despite pretty much always having a porous, awful defense is even more impressive. And he just seems like a mastermind. He's kind of figured out the college game on the offensive side of the ball. But USC kind of goes into that same line of what we thought about Michigan for so many years and Notre Dame for so many years. USC has kind of been just dwindling in purgatory for several years now. And we've been wondering when, not if, when are they going to fire Clay Helton? They finally did. And then they bring in Lincoln Riley. And it was almost as like everything that they had questions about was answered in one season. So I'm definitely anticipating a lot moving forward. But obviously the whole thing comes into play, him being young, all these things. I think that I'm buying a little more stock in Lincoln Riley right now than I am in Ryan Day. And I think it's because he's done it at two places. And they're both young and they both are very similar to me. If I'm splitting hairs, that's how I split it with what Lincoln has done at USC and Oklahoma. Whereas I think Ryan Day could replicate that at other places, but he was handed the keys to, Ohio State, and he's done a phenomenal job with it. So
I want to call it like, if we're comparing those two, I want to call out something. So Lincoln might have the opportunity to do this offseason. Ryan Day saw at the end of the 2021 season that he had a historic offense, and in their two losses, their defense just was not good enough, and that they were going to waste a historic offense if they didn't make a change. And he quickly made a change at defensive coordinator. He went and hired at the time probably the best available option at defensive coordinator, and bringing in Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State. And the defense was tremendously better this year at Ohio State. Lincoln we'll see, have the opportunity to do the same thing this next season. The defense was not good enough last year for them to compete for a championship. And here's the thing. This wasn't like year one with this guy. He was with them for 2 years at Oklahoma too, and very similar results. So positives on Lincoln. So that's why I had Day ahead of Lincoln, was honestly the making changes, the CEO mindset of a head coach. Lincoln is probably the best offensive mind in college football. He's coached 3 Heisman Trophy winners, plus a Heisman Trophy finalist in Jalen Hurts. He's the king of the transfer portal. If you think about this, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, all transfer quarterbacks who he brought them into his factory and turned them into at least Heisman Trophy finalists. Caleb, which I know he transferred to USC, but he was the first recruit that Lincoln Riley has gotten to come in as a freshman and be his, and which I think is why he was so emotional at the Heisman ceremony. He was like, this is the first one that was his baby. He identified him as a high schooler and has gotten to coach him to the pinnacle of our sport for a player and for a quarterback. So, and like you said, he goes into USC in year one, and I want to juxtapose this with our next person. I think you've got to give him an immense amount of credit for how he used the transfer portal to win in year one. Because here's the thing, as the sport evolves, you also have to evolve. And so, hey, the rules change. What does Lincoln do? He uses every resource to his advantage to make sure that, hey, you know what? Instead of this being a 3-year turnaround, I have an opportunity right now to go win in year one. And, a USC fan might say they were a Caleb Williams injury away from going to the college football playoff in year one under Lincoln Riley. So he used the sports resources and rules to his advantage, and he evolved as the sport evolved. You might be thinking, we've yet to mention a name on this list. And it was number 3 on the CBS list. I feel like you and I have been a little ahead on this. Number 7 on our list, Dabo Swinney. I think my biggest knock on Dabo is juxtaposed to Lincoln. Dabo has not evolved as the sport has evolved. And you might say, Jacob, 2018 is not that long ago. If you're looking at what college football looks like right this second to what it looked like in 2018 actually is kind of a long time ago in college football terms. And Dabo has not adapted and evolved to the ever-changing landscape in college football, whether it be their policy on transfers, I think their policy on commits and recruiting, their sorry, I was train of thought. Oh goodness. Oh, the staff hires is what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah.
Hiring from within. Now, I honestly gave him a little more credit and almost moved him up 1 just for hiring Garrett Riley after 1 season of the offense being terrible. But
right.
I do think he deserves credit for that. He went out and got, similar to Ryan Day going and getting Jim Knowles, I think he got the best available offensive mind that he could go get in Garrett Riley. So that being said, look, Dabo won 2 national championships at the height of the Saban era, and he'll forever have that. I started talking about this after the 2020 season of, hey, what happens when they don't have a generational talent at quarterback? This offensive line's kind of been bad for a while. Does that get exposed? Like, hey, they just lost the ACC's all-time leading rusher. Is that going to have an effect? Hey, they've recruited a lot of the same body at receiver. Now problem, I'm looking into the glass again of saying, what if Clemson doesn't have an elite defense? Like, because now the recruiting's kind of tapered off. What if they don't have a top 3 defensive line in college football? What happens then? So I'm lower on Dabo because I don't think he's evolved. What are your thoughts on Dabo?
Yeah, it's tough because you said it perfectly about him at the height of the Saban era, winning those 2 championships. You really opened it up when we had that offseason after Trevor left. We talked about DJ, and even if he's good, the difference in being, elite and great and all these kinds of things, because you were way ahead of it. Now we can look back and kind of just see, Deshaun Watson being who he was in college, and then Trevor Lawrence. I mean, especially in the conference they play in, it really covered up a lot of deficiencies they may have had, and it gives them a shot in every big game. They're going to have a puncher's chance. So, obviously they lose to Alabama in 2015 in the championship, and then the next year they beat them with Deshaun Watson. And then they go in 2016 and they actually embarrass Alabama. They blow them out in that game, which was
2018.
2018. Yeah. Sorry.
44-16.
Yeah. And that was just a remarkable, game. But since that time, we still will remember the 2019 and 2020 seasons where Trevor Lawrence led them and they were in the top 2, top 3 for the whole season, even made the playoff. But, it's just the offensive line is where I can't get past. And it's funny because it just wasn't that big of a deal when you had those guys, those special people there to cover those things up. It's weird having a 2-time college football national champion this far down on the list, but we didn't have to talk about hires for a while because for so long he had continuity, especially Brent Venables on defense. I think everybody who, even casual fans, knew that name, and when someone's there for that long, has such an identity, is such a great recruiter, continuously has that unit, just tops of college football. It really, what having a great defense does is it really just raises the floor of your program. And he did that for so long. And then those quarterbacks take you over the top. He hasn't had a quarterback since Trevor to do that. And then now he's lost the defense. So, I am concerned with you. He's dropped on this list for me. If I was hiring someone tomorrow, I don't think that Dabo can replicate what he's done. And that's my biggest concern. It goes back to the evolution aspect. College football is different today than it was then. And being able to replicate success is very important. That's why Saban is the greatest chameleon of all. He's been able to evolve his whole career and find success everywhere. I know that's kind of unfair to compare someone to that, but that's why he's at this point on the list. I think he's a good coach. I think he's earned his spot in the top 10, but he's not a top 5 coach. He's not a top 3 coach. We have him at 7.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Let's go to a coach who is at his first Power 5 gig for this upcoming season. So our number 8, Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell, Daniel, he's been at 3 schools as a head coach. What was the third?
Ohio State.
There you go. Yeah. Interim head coach, 2011.
That's the first time I remember his name.
So there you go. Losing season, unfortunately. One of the only 2 losing seasons he's had. His first year at Cincinnati went 4-8, but then 11-2, 11-3, 9-1, 13-1, college football playoff. He turned Cincinnati into a monster. And the G5 turned down a few jobs, said yes to Wisconsin, which tells me Wisconsin's serious about football. And Fickell, man, he's one of these, again, you're looking at full body of work and expectation versus reality. Expectation is never college football playoff at Cincy prior to expanded playoff.
Right.
Never sniffing that is expectation. So far exceeded expectation. Recruiting, again, it's at Cincinnati. He recruited some top 50 classes. I don't know if Cincinnati's a top 50 job, but development. The year after that playoff run, he put 9 players into the NFL draft, which was the second most of any school. So this is Fickell. I think Wisconsin has hired a top 10 coach in college football.
Yeah, they did a tremendous job. I think you and I both got super excited when we saw this hire just because, it's a match made in heaven. Fickell, yeah, it's kind of funny, the relationship, because obviously he was Jim Tressel's defensive coordinator. Jim Tressel ends up taking his whatever. He stepped down, fired, whatever it was. They agreed to part ways after the Terrell Pryor deal. And it led to the probation, but Fickell takes over for that year. He was close with Jim Tressel. Now his defensive coordinator is Mike Tressel, which is Jim Tressel's nephew, but that's kind of cool. But they, Fickell, for me, it's just he just knows what he's about, and I think that that's just so special for a coach. And I think he's been brought through the right way. He's phenomenal defensive mind. And then he's actually developed his coaches. Marcus Freeman comes to mind, obviously being a head coach now at Notre Dame. It's kind of funny because that's one of the few jobs we've been, we were led to believe that Fickell would have left Cincinnati for. So kind of gets passed over by his own, defensive coordinator. But, Ohio State, his alma mater, he would have loved to go back there. Wisconsin is just one of those few big brands in the Big Ten that makes sense. Anyways, his job that he did at Cincinnati, getting them to a playoff game is just phenomenal. That's why he's in the top 10 for me. I had him on a list of a few that I'm just very impressed with, their total body of work, their wins, everything like that. But being the first, group of 5 school to get to the college football playoff, the 4-team era, I just think it can't be, it's such a a big thing. And it was very obvious that he was the reason why. He's the engine that, Cincinnati's a place you can win. These other coaches, we talked about Brian Kelly. There's been other coaches that have been at Cincinnati and won while they're there. Fickell kind of put together maybe the best 3-season span at Cincinnati, and that's just a great notch in his belt. I'm excited to see what he does at Wisconsin. I can tell you, if he has big success in year one, potentially, let's just say 10 wins. If he wins 10 games this year, I could see him climbing this list and being a top 5 coach potentially.
I think you just said Wisconsin's winning 10 games in 2023.
I think I said that last week. When we
you did.
Our,
that's right. I forget you bought stock in Wisconsin. That's right.
Yeah, I ain't scared. But something, we mentioned it a little bit last week, and it's just weird. Him coaching the bowl game and then them going and winning. I think it's just the evidence of who he is and what he does, and the effect he can have. I think he can, inspire and culture and all that stuff. I'm interested to see what kind of recruiter he is now that he's at a big job like this. Not a natural recruiting place necessarily, but definitely a top 20 program nationally. So you got to make sure that you're, bringing in the right talent. So excited to see what happens.
Yeah, I am too. I like Fickell, like where he's at in this list. All right, 9, Lane Kiffin. Talk to me about Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is I did not have him in my top 10. He was 11 for me, but you had him at 8, I believe.
I think so. He was at 8, yes, for me.
So talk me through Lane Kiffin.
Well, Lane, I think, has been one of these that so obviously him getting the kind of his whole career, being with Pete Carroll as OC, then becoming the head coach of the Raiders, which was just crazy to think. He was so young, doing all that. He got kind of this perception that he was not serious. He leaves there, comes back to college, leads Tennessee to a pretty good season. His one season there, does a lot with a little, and then bolts for USC the year after that. I think him being a young coach, there was a lot of immaturity, but I think that there was people put a lot on him thinking that he's not just a great coach. There's a reason he got these jobs to start with. USC doesn't go great, and then he ends up in the what do they call it, the Nick Saban rehab for coaches, whatever it is. Him coming in to be with Alabama, I think, was the best thing for him, because I think he pushes Saban to learn and to think about things differently. But he thought about things differently. Goes down to FAU, great 2 years there, 3 years, whatever it was, and then getting the job at Ole Miss. I remember being kind of frustrated not when he came in necessarily, but them firing Matt Luke. I thought Matt Luke did a good job for what he was given. And Lane Kiffin comes in, changed quarterbacks. Obviously, everybody, it's well noted, I love John Rice Plumlee. But him going with Matt Corral and being able to develop Matt Corral into just a great, player, a Heisman contender, just could do everything. He developed that. That wasn't just, Matt Corral was kind of on a way to the transfer portal himself, or to be a backup for his career. And he was, an NFL draft pick. I also think Lane has just, since being at Ole Miss, you've seen this maturity. He kind of calls it like he sees it. He recruits really well. He does a good job with the transfer portal, using what he has, because Ole Miss is not a natural place to recruit folks to. He knows he's always going to be going against Alabama and LSU and all these schools in the SEC West. So he's kind of got to be, aggressive to keep, developed talent in-house. So he's been big in the transfer portal. And, the 10 wins 2 years ago with Matt Corral, I think at Ole Miss, at a place like that, winning 10 games is a big, big deal for what their expectations are. and then following it up after losing Matt Corral to win 9 games this year in the regular season. I mean, he's just recently I've seen him just kind of grow, and I think he turned down that Auburn job, and I think he could have taken it and maybe had a higher ceiling potentially, but maybe he thinks he can do that at Ole Miss. But yeah, I'm just really high on Lane Kiffin for his recent success. I think he has kind of turned a corner from what maybe he was previously, his previous rap was on him.
I wish he would have taken that Auburn job. But hey, maybe this is he's been at a job with high stress and high pressure before, and he doesn't want it again, or not yet, at least. I don't know, man. These guys are so competitive, though. Maybe he's just had enough. Like, he's had Tennessee, he's had USC, he's been in the NFL. Like,
he's been at Alabama.
I'm happy at Ole Miss. Like, if he's winning 8 games, they're gonna be more than thrilled at Ole Miss. He cycles up every few years, wins 10, goes to a New Year's Six Bowl. Heck, goes to the playoff here in the next couple of years.
He can annoy Nick Saban.
And again, you talk about people who have adapted to college football. He has made Ole Miss a transfer destination. Like, he knows that, like, hey, I can't compete with the Alabamas out of high school, but I can make Ole Miss a transfer destination and make it fun to come play in this offense. So that's exactly what he's done at Ole Miss in his 3 years there so far. So I like Kiffin. All right, number 10, James Franklin. James Franklin, underrated as a head coach. I think he's a no doubt top 10 coach. Something you mentioned, I'll let you talk about it, but full body of work. I mean, that means not just Penn State, right?
Right.
So, I mean,
yeah.
You go ahead.
That 3-year stretch at Vanderbilt where he won 9 games 3 years in a row. I mean, that's Vanderbilt, and that actually happened. And it was in the Saban era. I mean, of course, it was in the Mark Richt era of, UGA, but the SEC East was down. It was partially down because Vanderbilt was up, and James Franklin kind of burst on the scene. He didn't really care who he ruffled feathers with, and he won some games, and then he got out of Dodge when it was time. But since he's been at Penn State, he's basically solidified that program, has them kind of a well-oiled machine, has beaten Ohio State. So he's had some success. I think he's definitely a top 10 coach. He gets, he would be considered for all these things. He's a good recruiter. And I just have a good feeling about their program under James Franklin. So I think that he's someone who can, I think that as Michael Jordan would say, the ceiling is the roof. I think he could win national championship. I think he could win the Big Ten. I think you're going to see kind of in these next years when they get rid of divisions, that's going to be big for it. With a few years ago, it said that's big for Michigan. Well, Michigan's finally broken through that glass ceiling of Ohio State. I think that it's big for Penn State to be able to maybe, lose to Ohio State in the regular season and then play them again in the championship and maybe you'll beat them or whatever the case. So I just got a good trajectory there with James Franklin, and he's done it at multiple stops.
My biggest problem with James Franklin, 4-14. That's his record against Michigan and Ohio State. When you're Penn State, that's who you're comparing yourself against. Besides the fact he's got 36 losses at Penn State, like he's got a 684 win percentage. I think he's a top 10 coach in college football. I think this next season is one of those seasons where it's like, okay, show me something. Like, you had the COVID year, you had 2021, which wasn't great either. They went 10-2 last year. Only 2 losses were to teams in the college football playoff. So, great season for Penn State. Can you do it again? Like, can you go get one of those teams? Can you go get Michigan or Ohio State? Penn State's a team that's going to be tremendously helped when the Big Ten gets rid of divisions next year. They've been so hurt by being in the same division as Michigan, as Ohio State. Because now here's the thing. They've won the Big Ten one season while he's been there in 2016. they got missed out in the
2 losses.
playoff, and
Yeah.
right, and Ohio State got in. But they've won the conference. So this to me is when I say a prove it year for James Franklin, I don't mean a prove it or you're fired, but it's like, hey, show me that you're a top 10 coach in college football. Like, show me that you're elite this year. Go win 10 games again. Like, I need at least 10-2 from Penn State this year. This is a season where I do feel like they have the ability to go 11-1, and I say I don't know if TCU is a good comparison. That'll be what everyone says this year, a dark horse to go to the playoff. But I do like James Franklin. Daniel, one name that we left off our top 10 that you're like, at least we need to talk about, needs to be in the conversation.
Well, I'm going to have to choose between these two.
Can I take one of them just because he wasn't my top 10?
Yeah, you go for it.
Kyle Whittingham. Kyle Whittingham I had at 9 on my top 10. This is one of those, again, expectations versus reality. Expectations are not to go win the Pac-12 back-to-back years at Utah. This is a team that just joined the Pac-12. I say just joined, but gosh, it's been over a decade now, hasn't it? We're getting old, Daniel. But they've not been in there that long, and they've been the Pac-12's daddy last few seasons. And they're winning consistently. They're recruiting consistently in the top 30, which again at Utah is kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. Even he goes out and gets Andy Ludwig and spreads the offense out. He evolved his offense. They're pumping people into the NFL. They've just been a beacon of consistency since he's been at Utah, one of the more tenured coaches in college football, and has just won football games. So I think he needs to be talked about and be up there when we talk about some of the best coaches in the sport. I think he needs to be on that list.
Yeah, I guess I'll stick with Matt Rule. He was someone who I think is definitely a top 15. I think I had him at 12 or 13 on my overall list, but someone who's won at Temple. He obviously won at Baylor. That's where we all kind of fell for him. And then he goes to the NFL, kind of stagnates, ends up you get fired or you just leave. I can't remember, but anyways, yeah, he got fired last year and then comes back to college and then lands at Nebraska. This will be a phenomenal year to see his impact on a program that was once proud. Can he have, this is, another great fit, I think, because he's a program builder. I don't think that gets talked about enough from some of these guys is just their ability to build a program that's down and to get them built back up. So I think being able to do that in multiple stops like he has, yeah, go Matt Rule.
Did you know he wasn't even on the top 25 for the CBS list? That's ridiculous. I think
it's also some of those guys that do the voting kind of copy and paste from last year and then jockey a few up and down. And so a guy who wasn't on the list last year because he was in the NFL, that may have contributed to it. But
we're talking to you, David Cobb. So make sure you don't do that again next year. No, that's a good point. And I hope that's not a perception thing of he failed in the NFL. It's like that really doesn't matter when it comes to college football. Not translatable at all.
Right.
Very few
so did Steve Spurrier. Well. So did Nick Saban. And that may be two of the top 5 best coaches in college football history.
It very rarely works. Like Pete Carroll he's the exception. He's not the rule. Matt Rule. There you go.
Well, right, full circle right there. So
that's right. Next week we'll be talking about state of the program. What is the state of college football programs heading into the season? So not like current team, but hey, what's the state of your college football program? We're going to rank our top 10 programs in college football. So be sure to keep it right here on The Extra Point. Be sure to follow us on social media at The Extra Point Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can follow him on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of The Extra Point. He is Daniel. I'm Jacob.